Yo, what up guys, what up? So in this video guys, this is going to be part 7 of a multi-series videos. But in this video, we're going to be talking about how to connect to SharePoint and not just download files, like all files from a folder, but we're going to be doing crawling through all the subfolders. So we're specifying a directory, starting path, directory path, right? Starting folder. And if you happen to have 2, 3, 4 levels of subfolders with files in them, it's going to crawl each one. It's going to pretty much download all the files. And here's the kicker. It's going to save all of those files in the same structure locally, right? So just like the way you may have a starting point, then you have a subfolder, then there is a repo, Python, SharePoint, Office 365 API. You can go ahead and get a pull request to kind of get the code for the Office 365, and then ultimately the requirements and all the other stuff, right? In the example folder, that's where you're going to find what we're about to code up. Once we finish, I'm going to push it up to GitHub, but nevertheless, you'll find that new file in here. But yeah, guys, if you're not familiar or you're not sure how all of this works, go ahead and take a look at part 1 to kind of get familiar, because we kind of walk through this process. But nevertheless, I'm taking existing code when you're gonna add on to it. So that's pretty much what we're doing. All right, guys. So there's one thing that we need to add to the Office 365 API file. Again, guys, this is existing code, so go get a clone from the GitHub repo. But there is a new function that we're adding to our SharePoint class. So we're gonna, under get file list, we're gonna create a new function, and we're gonna call this get folder list self, and it's gonna have the folder name. All right. And then in here we're gonna have our connection equals underscore auth. Next we have our target URL, target folder URL, and in this case is going to be SharePoint underscore doc, and then it's going to be folder name, which is this argument right here. All right, and then we're gonna have our root folder connect web get folder by server relative URL. Then of course we're going to specify our target folder URL. Next we're going to expand our root folder, and this would be folders only, right? Not files, just folders only. Then we're going to call get, and then we're going to call the execute query method, and then that's it. After that, we're going to return our root folder object, but we want to specify it to only return back folders. So I'm going to call that, so we're calling the object root folder, and then inside that root folder there's other properties. One of the ones that we're going to call will be folders, which ultimately going to give us back a list of the folders in return. So that's what we're going to get back under here once we create or get folders. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to create a new file. So let's go ahead and create a new file. I'm going to call this bad boy download files with subfolders. subfolder. All right, so that's pretty much what we're calling this with subfolder. Then make this a little bit bigger. Make sure it's easy to see on the eyes. All right, cool. So what we're gonna do first, we're gonna need to pull in our Office 365 API, which again, this is going to be this file here, pretty much. Import SharePoint. Again, I'm not going to go into detail of what this does. Go look at part 1. It explains all of that in more detail. So let's see what else. I'm going to import in system, and I believe that's it for now. And then the next thing is, so I'm going to import in passlib, import purepass. So we're going to be using purepass. Purepass is ultimately to kind of build my directory pass. But again, purepass is ideal because it works regardless if you're dealing with Windows or Mac or Linux, right? Because it's all different. Your backslashes, forward slashes. So it kind of standardizes it pretty much. All right, so the first argument that we're going to have, we're going to go ahead and get that set. It's going to be the SharePoint folder name. May include subfolders. So it may be like YouTube 2022. Right, so let's go ahead and call this folder name. System argument 1. Now the reason why it's not 0, because again guys, anytime you run Python in your terminal and then you provide your the file name, which in this case will be this file, that's argument 0, right? That's the first argument. Anything after that becomes argument 1, 2, and 3, and so on, right? So just FYI on that, those of you who are kind of new. The second argument is going to be location, local or remote folder location. So this is ultimately where we're going to save it to, right? In my case, it's going to be locally on my computer, but technically it could be somewhere else. So when I say remote location, I mean more if you're working in a corporate environment. Maybe you have like an internal network, right, of different servers internally, and you could just kind of provide that pass, right, of that local remote server. Now if you're dealing with remote from a sense of cloud remote, that's not going to work in this case. This is more local or remote within the internal network, pretty much. So this would be folder destination, system argument 2. All right. And then the third one, this is going to be argument 3. Argument 3 would be determine if all folders, I'm going to call this subfolders, need to be all folder / files need to be downloaded. So this is what we're saying here is I'm going to call this crawl folders. So ultimately what this is doing here is saying, do we want to download all the subfolders and files included, or do we just want to download all the files based on the directory path that we provide? So if we provide, let's say, a path of YouTube 2022, if this is, let's say, blank no or something, right? Let's say it's not yes, put it that way, it's not yes. What it's going to do, it's only going to download all the files that relate to this folder only. That's it, right? So keep that in mind. But if we specify this to yes, it's going to crawl and download all the subfolders and all of that, all the files. That's pretty much what it's doing. So we're gonna create a few functions right now, right? So we're gonna create a few functions that we're gonna utilize. So let's create a save file function, which is the first one. One of the arguments would be file name, file object, and then the next one would be subfolder. Right, subfolder, if we happen to, whatever the subfolder name is, we're providing that as well. We're going to end up building our directory path, and this is where pure path comes in. And the first thing would be our folder, destination. Again, this is locally where we're going to save it to. And then it's ultimately going to take the subfolder. So again, it's concatenate them together, but where they folder paths. That's ultimately what pure path is doing. Where it is a directory path that we could now run, do a check on, or better yet, save our files to that path. Right, kind of is pretty much what we're doing. The next thing that we're gonna do is file directory path. And we're going to use pure path again, but this time it's going to be directory path and file name. Right, same thing, just kind of putting them together, concatenating them together, and then finally we're going to call our with open file directory path, right, binary. Because again, if it's text, binary, whatever it may be, we want to write it. And ultimately what we're going to do here, we're going to call write, and then we're going to end up specifying, well, what is it that we're writing, right? Like we specified here the directory path with file name, right? We provided that, and then of course we got to write something like the actual object itself, and that's where this comes in, right? The file object is going to save that bad boy. So that's kind of what this is doing. Alright, so this is to pretty much save the file to local or remote location. Pretty much what this is doing. Alright, the next thing that we're going to do here is create the create directory if it doesn't exist. So we're going to create a function again for this. We're going to call this create directory, and ultimately we're going to provide a path. And this is pretty straightforward what we're going to do here, right? We're going to go ahead and create another use pure path to create, again, concatenate our folder destination with the subfolder, and we're gonna do a check, does this exist? And if it does exist, then there's nothing to do. But if it does not exist, then we want to create it. It's ultimately what we're doing. So let's do pure path, folder destination, and then pass, right, which is this argument that's coming through. And then now we're gonna do a check. You know what? I didn't bring this in. So let's kind of going back on top. See how we import the system? I need to import OS. The reason why, because we're gonna end up using the OS method for pass exist. So this method is gonna check to determine, does this pass exist? And if it does not exist, then we're gonna create it. It's pretty much what we're doing. So directory pass, and we're saying, my bad, I forgot to put, so it's if not exist, right? If not exist, which means it does not exist. So if it does not exist, then we're gonna do a make directory. So only if it doesn't exist, we're gonna create it, and if it does exist, there's nothing to do. Straightforward, guys, pretty straightforward. All right. Okay, so now the next function is going to be called get file, not files, but file. We're going to create two. One of them is called get files, and it would be file name and then folder. And this one, it would be file object equals SharePoint, download file, file name, then folder. Right, so ultimately this, again, I have a video that goes in more detail of this function here, so you could look at that video. But again, this function takes two arguments: the file name that we want to download, and then ultimately the folder, specifying the path on where to find it in SharePoint, like the folder path in SharePoint, and that's how we'll be able to download that file. That's pretty much what that's doing. And then as we get the results back, right, as we download it, we're going to end up calling the save file function that we just created up on top. And in this case, we're going to provide the file name, right, whatever it is that we're downloading, the same name, the file object, and then the last one is going to be folder. We're the same folder that we're trying to find in SharePoint. We're going to provide that in the save file to save it in the same manner, right? So we want to mimic on how it's structured in SharePoint with the subfolders to be able to save it the same way locally. So that's why we're doing that. All right, so the second function is going to be called get files, again with an S, right? So it's get files, and in this case we've got to specify the folder and the folder only. So in this case it will be files list, SharePoint underscore get files list, and then we're going to specify the folder. Now what this does here, this function, again, watch my previous videos, it goes in more detail. This function actually grabs a list of files from a specific folder that we specify. So we specify a specific folder and it's grabbing a list of files, right? So if there happen to be 5 files in that folder, it'll give me back those 5 files in the form of a list. So that's kind of what this is doing, right? That's what it's called, files list. And then once I get that back, I'm going to end up doing a for loop. So it'll be for file in files list. And then I'm going to end up calling the get file, right? Now without the S, not files, but get file function. And inside here, I'm going to be specifying the file dot name and then folder. Keep in mind, this file list that I got back is actually giving me back objects in the form of list, right? So if I have 5 files, the values inside those 5 rows of the list, they're not string text value, they're actually objects, which is why I gotta call this object, then I gotta specify the dot name property to get back the name value, right? The string value of the file name. So just kind of, again, watch previous videos if you like to go into more detail what that's doing, but just a quick insight, that's kind of what that's doing. All right, so now that we got that created, we're gonna create our next function, which is called get folders. Okay, and all we're doing here, providing a folder path. So the purpose here is, just like this one, we provide a directory path and we get back a list of files. Well, if we have subfolders, that's what this is doing. This is going to give us back, get back a list of subfolders from specific folder. So again, this is going to give us back a list, but of subfolders in return. So that's kind of what this is doing. All right. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to call this list. Okay, so under our get folders, we have a blank list object, call it L, and then we're going to create a new object, folder object equals SharePoint get folder list, and then we're going to end up populating in here the folder, again, which is going to be this guy. This argument's going to go in here. Okay. Next, we're going to do an iteration. We're going to iterate over this folder object because it will be, it's going to, pretty much it's a list of folders, right? So we're going to call this folder, just call it item in folder object. And then we're going to call this subfolder equals, and we're going to use the join method here. And ultimately what we're joining here would be our folder, which again, this argument here. And then it's going to be folder item name. So in reality, this is our subfolder object. I probably should have called it that. So let me call it subfolder object. It's a better name, more suited. So what we're doing here, we're creating a subfolder directory, like the full path of the folder with subfolder, and pretty much just concatenating them together is what we're doing here. You gotta make sure to call the name right. You gotta get the name property as well. So once we've done that, now what we're gonna do is a append. We're gonna append the subfolder to our list, right? Right now it's blank, but we're gonna append as we do our iterations to kind of get the whole list back, which will contain a list of all the subfolders. Then we're gonna return back that list. And that's it, guys. Those are all the functions that we need. So the next thing we're gonna do is let's go ahead and have our code on what we want it to do. So ultimately, I'm gonna have this where if name equals main, which means if I run the script, any code that I have under here is gonna run. So if you're not familiar, if you've seen this before, you don't know what this means, that's kind of, you know, and keeping it simple, that's ultimately what it means. So I'm gonna have some conditional logic that says if crawl folder equals yes, right? Again, that means I want it to crawl all the subfolders and download all the files. That's pretty much what I'm saying here, right? So the first thing that I'm gonna do here is I'm going to call my folder. I'm going to create a folder list object, and this is going to call the get folders function, right, that we created up here. And the argument is pretty much going to be the folder name. Remember how we created this argument over here? This is the folder, the SharePoint folder that we want to start at, right? So I'll show you an example in a minute, but ultimately that's where we're starting at. And it's going to give me back a folder list, because again, I'm calling the get folders function. That's what it's going to do. Next, I'm going to do iteration over that folder list that I got back. So it's going to be folder in folder list. And then, so now that I'm iterating over that list, I'm going to do another for loop. And in this case, it's going to be called subfolder in under the get folders function. Again, I'm calling the function because this function returns back a list. It's why I'm able to use it in my for loop. So just, again, you're wondering why I'm doing it this way. That's why. So this is my starting. Think of it as level 1 folder that I provide in SharePoint. And what I'm saying here is, okay, give me back the folders that are in that folder, right? So let's say give me back 5. Well, now I have a list of 5 folders in here that I'm now iterating over. As I iterate over each one, I'm getting back another list of folders inside each one of those subfolders. That's what I'm doing here, which is, I called it subfolders. And then from here, I'm doing a folder list.append, and I'm appending my subfolders to my folders list. Now keep in mind, this could be initially would be maybe 2-3 folders, right? So you have your starting folder. Let's say we have 3 folders under there, 1, 2, and 3, right? Well, right under 1, 2, and 3. But let's say under those 3, each one has 5 folders under there, which is a total of 15, right? So now you have level 0, level 1, and then you have level 2, which has 15 total folders. What this is doing, and the reason why this works is, as I iterate over it once and I find, oh, I have 3 folders, it's actually appending those results, those subfolders, to my folder list. Because it's appending them to my folder list, it now is going to add it to this object, right? Same object, which means my for loop is going to iterate over whatever I appended as well. So as my list gets bigger, it's going through the for loop process of getting the folder list as well. So that's how I'm able to get a complete list. So once I've done that, what I'm going to end up doing is folder list, and I'm going to call this will be my starting index, right? Pretty much index 0, which is the starting point of my list. Oops. I want to add my folder name in here, and the reason why is I gave it a starting point, but I want to download files from that starting point folder as well, if there is any files. Then from there, I want it to iterate over as well. One thing to keep in mind: this is in a clean list. It's in a nice order, and this is key because as we start creating directory paths, it will be able to create things easily as it creates things in levels, right? So you have a folder. Let's say you have a folder called music, and then it's the year 2022, and then it's, let's say, months, and then let's say it's day. Well, if you have a folder called music, and let's say there's nothing in there, and then you automatically, I don't know, where you want to create a folder that's called 2022 January, a date. It can't create it because A, 2022 doesn't exist yet, and then B, the month doesn't exist yet. This will put it in a nice order, so as it creates the files, the folders, it will actually create 2022 first, and then once it's ready, it'll create the months folder. Then eventually, once it gets to the point where it's trying to save, let's say, a file that belongs into the date, there's already the year, the month, all the other stuff is already created, right? So that's something just to kind of keep in mind. So let's see. Now I'm going to do my iteration. So I'm going to ultimately end up iterating over my folder list. So in this case, it will be 4 folders in folder list. And then we'll create folder if it doesn't exist, and in this case would be create directory. Remember, if it doesn't exist, it's going to create it, but if it does, then we're all good. Next, get the files for specific folder location in SharePoint. So this is where we're going to call the get files, and we're going to specify the folder name. But again, this is all, we had to build our list first of all the file structure that we want to see. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to print this so we can see it, right? So I'm going to print a folder list so you can see how the final result looks, right? So I'm going to do that. Now this is a if condition. So of course the else in this case will just be get files folder name. So again, this condition is saying if we want to crawl all the folders and download everything, make sure it passes argument as yes. If it's not yes, it's only going to download the files for whatever directory path we provide. It's not crawling any folders. So I'm going to download all the files. So that's something to just kind of keep in mind. Guys, this is it, man. This is it. So now that we have everything in here, let me go ahead and save. And let's go to SharePoint because I want to show y'all how this looks. So if I go to SharePoint, see how I have this data folder, then I have a year, right? 2020, 2022. We're going to be dealing with 2022 in our case. And then we have files, then we also have folders, calls, sales. So calls has another folder in there called January, but there's a file in here too. And then there's more files in here, right? So we have, a lot of different files. Sales, we have January, we got files in here. We have one called test. Same thing, let me go back to February, test 2, and more files. So as you can see as an example, many subfolders, many files located all over the place. So we're gonna go ahead and run the process and crawl it. This is where I'm gonna specify where I want everything to be dumped into, right? So this is where I want everything to be saved to. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this URL path, this directory path. And remember, let's look at our arguments. These are our arguments on where we're starting. So first is going to be Python, the name of my folder, my file, which is download file with subfolders. Okay, number one. My second argument, which is this one, is folder name. So in this case, if I go back, it's going to be data 2022. I want to download everything in the data 22 folder. By me doing that, it's not going to download this 2020, right? But it's going to download everything inside the 2022 folder. If I want everything, I would just specify data. But in my case, I only want files and subfolders from data 2022 folder. So I'm going to call this data 2022 space. The next argument going to be where do I want to save this files to. So I am put double quotes and specify the folder where it's going to get saved to. The reason why I say put double quotes is if your directory paths or has any spaces and things of that nature, it throws it off. If you don't, like in my case, there are no spaces, I could do without double quotes and it'll be fine. But just to kind of keep a standard, I just automatically put double quotes regardless. Then my third argument here is going to be, do I want to download all subfolders? I'm going to select yes. If you don't want to, just type in no, none, anything else besides yes, put it that way. But in my case, I do want to download all subfolders, so I'm going to type yes. So now that I have done that, let me make this a little bit bigger. Let's go ahead and run it, and hopefully no errors, but yeah, let's run it. All right, let's see. It's running. It's running. We got a list back. Okay, so far it's looking good. Let's look at our folder. Boom, we got a folder in here. Remember how I just showed this folder? It was empty. Data 2022. Oh, I see files. I see more folders called sales. January. Then I see, oh, there's another file. What else? Is anything else being created? Or no? There we go, that's all done. So if I go back, sales, January, February, test, boom, dude, it downloaded everything. All files, all subfolders. As you can tell, the subfolders match to what's in SharePoint. So if I go back to the SharePoint, compare the two, data 2022, data 2022, call sales, file names. If I go into sales, and I go into sales, dude, everything matches to the T. It all matches. So again, it did exactly, guys, exactly what we wanted to do. And then again, if we look at the list, as you could tell the list, see how we have the directory paths and SharePoints that we want to ultimately download files for. But we look at the pattern, right? Something that I want you to be aware of. There's a pattern to here. This is the top level directory. This is, I'm going to call this tier 1 or level 1 or level 0, better yet, right? And then you have level 1 directory, which is after the year, which is sales and calls. And then after this, you have level 2, which is inside sales. You have, again, January, February. And then inside calls, you have January. Then after that, you have level 4, which is test inside January and test 2 inside February. But look at the order, and the reason why this matters, and it does this automatically, because as it goes through the process and creates folders and does all of that, it goes in this order pretty much, right? So that's why there shouldn't be any issues because of the order it's going to. I do believe regardless, it probably still, even if it goes in this backwards order, it'll create all these folders as well, I believe. Again, now that I think about it, I think it will do that. But either way, you know, just kind of keep it more structure and a nice order flow to avoid any issues. You'll kind of see the pattern. So again, guys, this was a request from somebody, and of course, this is my part 7 of a multi-series dealing with SharePoint. This is key, dude. This is very, very beneficial in so many ways, especially if you're trying to archive stuff in SharePoint, maybe move it somewhere else, or just archive it, right? Zip it up and store it to the side because you're cleaning up SharePoint or whatever. This would work ideal, and it'll crawl all your folders and download all your files and all of that, guys. So again, hopefully this helps out. And again, guys, man, appreciate all the support I've been getting. Thanks for watching the video, and peace.